All right, now we'll go to Linda McLaughlin.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for sticking through this. My name is Linda McLaughlin. I have a background in politics and media. I have an MBA in business, and I am a part of the Data Integrity Group. One of the things that we have unfortunately seen is that no one has presented data. We hope to remedy that this afternoon. I'll be introducing my two colleagues here, Dave LeBeau and Justin Mealy, both of who are data scientists, and we will look at data. Please understand that data is numerical. It is not partisan. It has no red or blue attached to it. It is just numbers, and numbers is all we need to prove what we're trying to tell you today. I'll turn it over to Justin.
All right, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting us to speak here. My name is Justin Mealy. I'm a 9.5-year veteran of the U.S. Navy as an electronic warfare technician and Arabic linguist, 4 years of which I spent at your very own Fort Gordon in Augusta. Then after that, a CIA contractor as a data analyst, programmer for the National Counterterrorism Center, and then now currently work for one of the big four accounting firms as a programmer, data scientist, everything in between. Okay. So the first thing I want to say real quick is that what we're not here to speak about, we're not here to speak about dead voters, illegal votes, out-of-state voters, that type of thing, right? Because although that might have happened and it might have affected the election, we can't prove it from a data perspective that because a dead voter voted, that they voted for Joe Biden. So because of that, we've thrown out that type of thing. We're only here to talk about hard data. So when you do hard data analysis, the most important thing you can ask is, what data are you analyzing? So we use 3 separate data sources, right? The first data source comes from the New York Times as a JSON feed. It's called the Edison data source. And that Edison data feed is a time series based data. When I say time series, I mean you have different vote releases at different intervals, and we can kind of see that votes are incremented at different intervals, right? Then the second data source actually feeds that data source, which you're going to see in the video that's coming. That second data source is the CITL data source. That CITL data source kind of bifurcates that data and sends sends the data exactly to the Edison data feed and sends that to the Secretary of State. So your Secretary of State's data that you're actually basing the certification process off of is that CITL data for all intents and purposes. Now, because the Secretary of State data gets it after the CITL server, what happens then is the Secretary of State could possibly change that. So we use a third data source, which is the Secretary of State data, to verify that the data totals down all the way down the line. Okay. So with that being said, there was a question earlier I heard from a senator where he asked something about, how many votes did something happen? How many votes, was it enough to change the election for Donald Trump or whatever like that, right? And I want to say that just about that question in particular, I think the person answered there were about 50 votes, 100 votes, that type of thing. I want to answer that question in particular to say that any change in that data set, you see, if there was a fraudulent activity that occurred, then you're looking at post-fraudulent data. Okay, so if I went into my calculator and I entered in 1 + 1 + 2, right, and then I got -6 at the end, from a time series perspective, I'm going to see 0 and I'm going to see -6, and I will never have seen all the data that happened in between. So that's what we're talking about here when we're talking about data. Okay, that being said, the thing I want to kind of conclude on before I turn over to David is that what we have here is we actually have fraud that we can prove in this election. There was fraud in Georgia's election. We can prove it with data. And because we can prove it with data, the voting will of the people of Georgia is not reflected in what was certified by the Secretary of State. So Dave is our lead data scientist, and go ahead.
Thank you, Justin. And thank you everyone for inviting us here today to speak. I'm Dave LeBeau, a data scientist with over a decade of experience working directly with structured and unstructured data across a number of industries, specialized in machine learning and more recently artificial intelligence. I've worked with a multitude of data structures in the financial services, telecommunications, and in primary research consulting industries. The analysis we're going to be reviewing is purely scientific and not based on any political affiliation of red, blue, left, or right. We objectively focus on numbers, data, and machine network systems. Based on our extensive analysis across precinct, county, and state voting results, we've identified over 40 data points where negative voting or outright vote switching across candidates has totaled over 200,000 votes. Separately, we've applied machine learning algorithms that are regularly used for anomaly detection of fraud in financial services that flagged over 500 precincts with over 1 million corresponding votes that exhibited suspicious activity. So what's important to note here is that in alignment with standard fraud investigations, we've applied a rigorous, systematic, and sophisticated process that has consistently identified data points that other industries, including financial services, would label as suspicious activity or definitively declare fraudulent. So I'll pause and with this in mind, I want to make this a little bit more relatable. And if you can take a moment just to think about how your online banking experience works. You probably have a checking, savings, and credit card account all on a single screen. Your online banking is designed so that built into this website interface is a back-end connection to a database. And this will store all of your balances, including your deposits or withdrawals. So you can review your statement each month or in real time confirm that the transactions you made are accurate and true. So imagine now you logged into your account on November 5th and you noticed that there were something to the magnitude of 50 transfers across your accounts. Let's say you even deposited a few checks on the 3rd and 4th, and you would expect to see these transactions for each of the individual amounts you deposited. Now, instead, imagine your activity reflects these deposits going into your account, then being switched to a checking account, sometimes as an exact dollar amount, and other times being broken apart into slices and switched intermittently across different slice magnitudes. Now, this is obviously strange in itself and deeply concerning from a data integrity standpoint. Now, also imagine that some of these deductions are sent externally, and so the money is leaving your account entirely. You can see the exact amount that it's deducted and where it was sent that you did not authorize. So this is what we have identified within the voting system data that has been confirmed to align with the Secretary of State data that's used to certify these election results. The data is freely available to the public, but does require some advanced programming skills to extract, parse, and join these data sets in order to bring these types of insights to light. We're part of an independent team that has, in the spirit of transparency, made all of our analysis, programs, and data public so anyone can independently replicate. We've also put out a series of videos that help translate some of our more complicated analysis, which we're going to play here, that will help reinforce the message and maybe a different point of view that will help make these concepts more digestible.
I don't think there's any audio. I don't know if you meant to have audio. There's no audio.
Yeah, we can't hear it, guys.
You may be on mute.
Oh, there we go.
Thanks.
Receiving over 90% in a precinct is a marker for fraud. In Fulton County alone, we can see that more than 150 precincts voted 90% or more for Biden. In the statewide race that was decided by less than 13,000 votes, these 150 Fulton precincts alone accounted for 152,000 Biden votes. This is a clear indicator of suspicious or outright fraudulent activity.
We've scanned 113,130 as of moments ago. We've adjudicated 106,000 plus of those.
Adjudication, the process of reviewing a ballot that may have been flagged during the ballot scanning process.
The only ballots that are adjudicated are if we have a ballot with a contest on it in which there's some question as to how the computer reads it. So the vote review panel then determines voter intent.
In 94 precincts in DeKalb County, it is statistically impossible to have 9 out of 10 voters voting for Joe Biden.
We've just seen a few examples of statistical irregularities and impossibilities. Now, we'll take a closer look at some vote manipulation within the election database, including explicit vote count switching from one candidate to another. We can see in Dodge County, there's a lot of strange activity going on. The left side of the screen shows incremental votes as they were reported for both election day and absentee. On the right, we can see the total vote counts, which should only be incremental, moving as the county reported in real time. Again, here we're focusing only on Donald Trump's votes. So this wouldn't necessarily be captured at the state totals as they're reported on TV, since one county's deduction in votes can be offset by another county's reporting of equal or greater votes. The first question you're going to want to ask, or already have asked, is why are any bars going negative? And the answer is they shouldn't. Unbeknownst to the general public, votes for Donald Trump were being switched and removed from his total, which often coincided with other precinct updates that simultaneously offset deductions so that they appeared to remain neutral to outside observers. Across the three counties of Dodge, Daughtry, and Putnam, Trump has over 30,000 votes that simply disappear. Here, we have clear visibility of an event that occurred at the county level as we compare two data sources. In this case, Donald Trump reported 29,391 votes at 9/11 local time in Bibb County, Georgia. Simultaneously, Joe Biden was reported to have 17,218 votes. Minutes later, at the next reported time update from the precinct data sources, Donald Trump is reported to have 17,218 votes, and Biden now has 29,391 votes. A clear and exact switch of vote totals between candidates. Because there is a time lag between each state reported aggregation of county results, this type of switch can go undetected in state reporting, as long as it falls after the latest state refresh and before the next state update.
According to the Georgia Secretary of State website, Trump lost by 12,670 votes. As you saw earlier in this video, far more than that were taken from President Trump. In statistics, an anomaly or outlier is an observation or event that deviates so much from other events that it arouses suspicions in its generation. In this, an isolation force is defined as a specialized learning algorithm for anomaly detection that works to the principle of isolating these outliers and flagging them for potential review. Remember these graphs when you meet your government officials in person. The burden of proof is on the system to prove our elections were fair, and not the people.
Okay, so here's how your vote is counted in Georgia using Fulton County's process as an example. So after you check in at a poll pad to vote on election day, you go to an ImageCast precinct terminal. After you cast your vote, a ballot image is saved on the machine. And after all the polls close, the SD cards containing all the ballot images are removed from the terminals and transported by car to, in Fulton County, one of 4 drop-off locations. Then it's transferred by police escort to the 1365 English Street warehouse. Inside of there, it is run through a tabulation software called Democracy Suite, which counts the ballots and exports the totals to a Dominion server that inserts those totals into a SQL Server database. From that point, it's directly transmitted to the CITL Election Night Reporting Server. The Election Night Reporting Server is responsible for transmitting the totals to the Secretary of State for output to their website, and data aggregators like Edison, who then transmit that data to the networks.
As you just saw, there's a standard process for transferring votes by memory card from precinct to county vote aggregators. Now, let's focus specifically on this square box detailing the data entry process for county updates. The following options are available to anyone with access to these computers working in the election software: updating vote batches, rejecting vote batches, and even more notable, generating new or temporary batches that can be injected directly into the vote tally. Each of these options can then be validated and published into the system. Again, anyone working in the election software at this point has the power to manipulate large batches of votes. And all of this is before the data is even uploaded to the server.
What should have happened during the validation process? Were there 2 observers from both parties present for the transmission of the SD card? Were there 2 observers from both parties present in the car when the votes were taken to the drop-off locations? Is there a public log of these exchanges at the various drop-off points and locations? Why are elected officials not asking these questions about our most sacred right to vote?
Okay, so real quick, I just want to jump in there, and if you can go back to that chart, I want to reference 2 things on side there. The diagram. Okay, so in this diagram here, as I was telling you earlier, we use this CITL source, the election night reporting source. We have their data for all of Georgia. As also, we have the data that comes from the New York Times, or the New York Times Edison part on the right side there, right? And for all intents and purposes, that election night reporting is going from there directly to the Secretary of State. Right? This is the same data. It's the exact same data. Now, the thing is that in every single aspect of this chart, from the poll pad, which doesn't really affect the thing, to the ballot marking device, more importantly, these actual ballot marking devices on the precincts, when they are tabulated at the end of the polling period, and the kind of these SD cards are removed, or sort of the compact flash drives are removed, they're transmitted by person to these drop-off points, tabulated, and so on and so forth. This whole process is a machine-to-machine-to-machine transfer for all intents and purposes, using humans as a medium, but at the same time, you're not having people enter, for instance, into a spreadsheet, these totals. Because you're not having people enter these totals into a spreadsheet, that removes the entire layer and the entire argument for any kind of human entry error, because there's no human being entering anything anywhere in here. You can't show me a place where a human being enters stuff in here. Now, if there were a human being entering something in there, then that would point to a type of fraud or a fraud aspect of this whole thing. So the point is that our data that's showing these negative drops is coming from a machine-to-machine-to-machine source. There's no reason that at any point something should be subtracted. And I want to make that very, very clear, that at no point in an incremental process should you decrement. Dave?
Are there any questions? No. Sorry.
To add to that too, I wanted to highlight just very quickly, I know we're short on time, but we mentioned the RTR software options in the video. And what's important here is that this is built into the software itself, so that, when anyone logs into their Windows or Apple machines, you have a certain set of, maybe you have parental controls on there for children, but in this particular case, there's no overarching controls, and this type of flexibility of options you see here on that 1 through 4 is available. So there's a situation where new batches can be recreated, you can reject, which is outside of this typical chain of sequence within this network diagram, where votes should go in at the polling locations. Votes should be counted at the absentee counting locations and through SD cards, and only in extreme situations, if there was an adjudication, are those processes should they be altered. And the fact that this exists anywhere within this sort of sequential supply is a vulnerability in the overall system. So this is here to identify that vulnerability exists, and also to reinforce the fact that what we had seen in our data analysis of votes going negative should be outside of that process, and also should not exist, because we are thinking about a machine talking to a machine talking to a machine. And a machine, unless it's explicitly programmed to decrement, should not decrement, especially in a voting situation. Similar as the way you deposit money into a bank account you mentioned earlier, votes, no different. You only are adding here. And if there's a removal, there needs to be a very good explanation as to why. And that has not been provided, and simply nor is it consistent with how the data is structured and what we've seen in our analysis as to any part of the process that would be consistent with normal or routine legal voting.
Are there any questions?
Can I make one brief, Mr. Chairman,
yes.
one brief note?
Yes.
Just as a point of reference in layman's terms, please understand that the data that your Secretary of State's office is certifying with is the same data that shows these negative decrements, is the same data that they are receiving, is what the New York Times is reporting, is what the networks are reporting. So either the Secretary of State's office is recording and certifying results that have negative errors and fraudulent votes in them, or someone is giving them negative information. We're not here to point fingers. We're just here to tell you that the certification of votes and the votes that were submitted for the state of Georgia have negative swings in them and have decrements in them. And these are errors, and they are not representative for the state of Georgia and how the state of Georgia's voters voted.
Wow.
Mr. Chairman, may I also add something?
Yes.
So there was a point in that video where we showed, I think it was Richard Barron, who had said that 113,000 votes were cast, 105,000 were adjudicated, right?
Right.
Now, that's not physically possible, which we can prove mathematically. But at the same time, if you adjudicate 105,000 votes, you have to understand from a technological perspective, as we've delved into all the different aspects of how the vote moves along. When you adjudicate a ballot, that old reference, the image that you saw or anything like that, is completely destroyed. It's gone. You can no longer reference that thing. And when you go run a hand recount, like you did in Georgia, then you're looking at the printouts of those ballot scans. So at no point did the original voter intent enter into that process once it's destroyed. And that's the one thing I don't really hear people talking about, which is very, very important, is that original ballot that you cast, especially from an absentee point, is destroyed and replaced with a new image with no metadata, no trail, and even from an audit perspective, it would fail because from an audit perspective, they're all using the same account to audit, so you don't know who made that change. You don't know how many times that change was made in the past. And if I had a group of two people, the Republican and Democrat, which used to be three people, but if I had a group of two people that was auditing something, and then they changed that changed the ballot image, and then the other people from the League of Women Voters then audited that exact same ballot, the only thing you would see from the end perspective, data-wise, is that final audit. You would not see any intermediate audit or any intermediate ballot image or the original ballot image. So keep that in mind when we're talking about adjudicated ballots. That should be a very severe thing to have to audit something. And when you're freely saying that there's 105,000 ballots that were audited, either you are saying that there's some kind of impossibility in the auditing process, or that you don't know what an audit means. And this person is in charge of the elections in Fulton County. So I just want to.
The major point is that if every vote counts, and we're seeing vote swings where there are changes, whether it's one vote, 30,000 votes, 200,000 votes, at what point do you as legislators, as elected officials of your people, start to raise the question, why are my people not being represented? Why are my voters' votes not counting?
And I said audit, I actually meant adjudicate, my bad.